Genesis chapter 22 is where we'll be here today in our study. I taught school for about 2 years. I taught at a small private Christian school, just a little part-time teacher, and I taught math and science and PE. PE was my favorite because it didn't take a lot of work. Math wasn't too bad. It was 7th and 8th grade math, and I could figure it out. It wasn't too bad. Science I really didn't like because I didn't know that much about science, so I had to study before I taught. And one thing I had to decide is, what did I want to do for tests? Why does a teacher give tests? Now, there's probably a lot of different reasons for tests. To me, I came down to the main reason I gave tests was not to determine how well a student understood the material or to help evaluate them. That wasn't the type of test that I like to give. I wanted to give a test really for one reason: to challenge the kids to study even more and solidify what I had been teaching to them. Because most good students, what they'll do is before the test is they'll take time to really study and review the material to make sure they know it, they understand it. And my purpose was to help drive home in their mind the material that I had been teaching. Well, we're going to see this morning how Abraham was tested by God. And when I remember first hearing this, in fact, if you look at Genesis 22, verse 1, it begins this chapter and it says that God tested Abraham. Well, does this mean that God was wondering what Abraham was thinking and decided if he's going to pass or fail? I don't think that was the kind of test. I think it was a test given to help strengthen the faith of Abraham. Not a test to determine what he would do. God already knew what he was going to do, but I believe this test was really to help Abraham in his spiritual growth. James chapter 1 says this: "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." So we're told in the New Testament that we have tests that God brings into our lives to help strengthen us, to help us to grow, to help gain a faith and a greater understanding and greater trust in God. And I believe that's what's happening here in this passage with Abraham. By the way, I mentioned this last week if you were here with us, but if you scan the QR code, if you want, I do have a Google slide presentation. You can follow along with the slides. If you miss any blanks, you're welcome to do that or go through it later. And pictures I refer to, they'll be on there that you can look at a little bit later on. In our study here, we were reading about Abraham. Last week, we talked about how Abraham and Sarah gave birth to a son they called Isaac. They had longed to have this son for many years. Sarah was 90 at the time. Abraham was 100. She was well past childbearing years. God miraculously provides this wonderful son, Isaac, for them. And yet we're told in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Take your only son Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains which I shall tell you." First thing I want to see this morning, Roman numeral number 1, is God will test us to increase our trust in him. And Abraham was instructed here to give up his son. Now note what it says here. God says, "Abraham, I want you to take your only son whom you love." Now remember, we know that at least for 25 years, Abraham and Sarah longed to have a son, but I would guess it would be for many, many more years before that. I would say probably close to 50, if not more. We don't know how old they were when Abraham was married to Sarah. But at least 50 years they longed to have a son. They had given up on having a son. And now she has a child. They have Isaac, whom they love and they adore and they cherish. And yet now God says, I want you to give up this most valuable, prized possession. I want you to give up your son. Now, this is something I have a hard time comprehending, why God would tell him to offer him as a sacrifice. We know in the Old Testament, God says that it was sin to offer child sacrifices. But yet here, what God is doing is God is saying to Abraham, are you willing to give up this thing that is most precious to you for my cause? You know, as I think about that in our life, are we willing to give up those things that are most precious to us? Doesn't mean we have to give them up, no. But are we willing to give them up? There are sometimes God calls us to give them up. Other times he wants to see, are you willing to surrender that? Am I more special to you than your spouse, your children, your house, your lands, your possession, anything you own? Am I more precious to you? This is the test that Abraham is having to endure. How does he respond? Abraham chooses to obey God. Verse 3, so Abraham rose up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place which God had told them. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. He said to his young man, stay here with the donkey, and I will and the boy will go over there and worship and come to you again. By the way, God had told them to go to Mount Moriah. Now, Genesis doesn't say this right here in this passage, but later on in the Old Testament, we're told that Mount Moriah was actually where the threshing floor was, where God stopped the plague on David, and that's where eventually Solomon built the temple. No coincidence that it was there. The very place where the presence of God would eventually dwell, and they go up from Hebron up to Mount Moriah, which would be near, of course, modern-day Jerusalem, but in that day it wasn't Jerusalem at the time. He sees the mountain, he goes up to this mountain, and there he's going to offer his only son. But I find it fascinating that Abraham chooses to obey. He doesn't try to go the other way. We think of like a Jonah who ran the other way. He doesn't try to argue with God, make excuses. God says, this is what I want you to do, and Abraham obeys. Now, I thought about this as a parent. To travel for 3 days with my son here that I've longed. How old was Isaac? We don't really know. It says that he was old enough to carry wood. And we know that Sarah died when she was 30, when Isaac was 37. So somewhere between the age of probably 6, 7, 8, and 37, I'm thinking more of a younger, probably 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, maybe a little bit older. I don't really know. Whatever it is, he's going with his father, and they're going to offer this sacrifice. Now, could you imagine what Abraham was thinking during these 3 days? I don't know about you, but sometimes my mind gets consumed with things. Out of the last 8 days, I've spent 5 of them down at my daughter's house, helping her fix up her basement. And I am so glad to be done, because I lay in bed at night and all I do is think about what the next step is and what I need to do and how I'm going to put the drywall up and create these stud walls and move this stuff around. And we finally pretty much have it all done. But I can't imagine how consuming it would have been on his mind for 3 days as he's walking, knowing that I am going to offer up my son and wondering what God's going to do. Yet through this we see, letter C, that Abraham trusted God to provide a proper sacrifice. Look at verse 6. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took his hand from the fire, the fire and the knife. So they both went together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father?" And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself a lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they both went together. Now again, Abraham knows what's going on, and Isaac's wondering, where is the offering? Where is the lamb? And he's trusting God. He knows God's going to provide. He doesn't know how. All he knows is he's following God in obedience, trying to do what God says, trusting God to take care of it. And we see letter D that Abraham was willing to fully obey God. And I think this is an important note. He fully obeyed God. He didn't just go through the motions, but he was willing to completely sacrifice his son. Look at verse 9. And when they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar, and there laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Now we often get the picture, I've seen the picture of Abraham reaching up with the knife like this. Most likely he was basically cut the throat, is how they would offer their sacrifices. And he takes this knife and he's about to cut the throat of his only son. He binds him. He puts him there. I don't know what Isaac's thinking through this time. He had seen the faith of his father put into action over and over again. He's trusting his father, who Abraham is trusting, his father and God. He doesn't know what's going to happen. Now we are given a little insight. Hebrews 11:19 says, Abraham considered that God was even able to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Abraham knew, even if I have to do this horrific thing to my son, I know that God can bring him back, because God has promised that the nation would continue through my son Isaac. He knew what God had promised, but circumstances, what God led him to, didn't make sense. It didn't work together, but he was trusting God. I think this is so important for us to understand. There's times in our life where circumstances seem to make no sense to us. We know God's promises. We know what God promised he said he would do to us, or we know what God has called us to do, and we've stepped out in faith and we've done this, and yet things are not working out the way we want them to. Are we going to continue to fully obey God, or are we going to turn back? It's easy to go only so far and trust only so far and then quit. But Abraham, letter E, saw the fulfillment of his faith. Verse 11. But an angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your only son from me. Basically, he took him to the brink. I'm reminded of a song that was sung for many years. I think it's a country gospel song, but it says, don't give up on the brink of a miracle. Right here at this point, he could have said, forget it, God, I'm not going to do it. God takes him to this point, and God delivers. Verse 13. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And he called the name of the place, The Lord Will Provide, or Jehovah Jireh. The Lord provides. That is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. God provided what he needed. Now, does this mean that God is always going to spare somebody from death? No. Does this mean God is always going to flower us with abundant riches so we'll be wealthy beyond measure? Not at all. But it does remind us that God provides what we need when we need it, and the important thing for us is following the example of Abraham and choosing to trust God and obey him completely. As a result, Abraham reaped the rewards for his faith. Look at verse 15. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and not withheld your only son, I will surely bless you. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and the sand that's on the seashore. Your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Now, these are promises God had given before, and he had to trust God, and as he fulfilled what God said, God once again reiterates his promise, and he experienced this amazing blessing. And I think we're reminded not to give up too soon, not to quit, not to say, fine, I'll go with this. It's easy sometimes not to trust God, and we take something that's really not as good for us that God would have, or not part of his plan, because we don't have enough faith to trust in him. Around 45 years ago, my family, I was about 5, 6 years old, our family came up to this area for the first time. The plan at that time, we were coming over for the 4th of July weekend. We were going to camp at D.H. Day. We went to the D.H. Day Park, and it was full, the campground. So they instructed my dad about how to get to the Platte River campground. And my dad drove, and if you're familiar with this area at all, you have to drive down 22, and it's probably, 20 miles or so from D.H. Day to get to Platte River campground. And my dad kept going, and it was nighttime, and he went all the Deadstream Road, which is so close, just a couple miles away, and he turned around and went all the way back to D.H. Day or something. He got lost trying to find this. Eventually, he found the Platte River campground. Our family at that time fell in love with the Platte River campground. We continued to camp at Platte River almost every year until our family got too big to reserve campsites. Then my parents bought property. Long story short, 10 years later, we bought property next to my parents' property, and I'm here today. Now, if my dad would have just said, forget it, we're going to go back home, or let's go towards Traverse City and camp somewhere, I probably would not be here today. But through these circumstances, as my dad continued to press on and found this campground, it basically changed a lot in my life today, because, like I said, I don't know where I'd be. But I fell in love with this area ever since I was a kid. And it's so easy many times for us to give up, to fall short, to quit of something that God has for us that's waiting, and we don't know what it could be. So whatever God has called you to do, don't quit, don't give up, don't fall short. We see number 2, Roman numeral number 2, that God rewards the faithfulness of those who follow him. Verse 1 of chapter 23 describes how Sarah lived to 137, and that Abraham wanted to give her a proper burial. So he wanted to give her a place, basically, that her body could be. We see this, letter A, that Abraham gained great respect because of God's blessing. Chapter 23, verse 5. The Hittites answered Abraham. So what happens here is Abraham says, look, I'd like to buy a cave to bury Sarah. They answered, verse 6, Hear, my Lord, you are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead from among our tombs, and none of us will withhold from you the tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. So Abraham, basically, they say to Abraham, look, pick out a plot of land, and we'll give you whatever land you want. Now, you know what I see from this? Letter A, Abraham gained great respect because of God's blessing. Scripture says that when a man's way pleases the Lord, even his enemies will be at peace with him. Now, we understand that this is just a proverb. It's not 100% true across the board, because Jesus pleased God in all that he did, and he had enemies. But in general, when you do what is right, as Abraham did what was right, he earned the favor of the neighbors around him. You will earn the favor of many of your neighbors around you when you do the right thing, when you live the way God wants you to live. You will earn the favor many times of your employers, those people that live around you, that you go to school with, that are part of your lives, when your way pleases the Lord. That's what we see from Abraham. They say, look, take whatever you want. But interesting enough, Abraham refused to take the land as a gift. Now, this doesn't mean that it's wrong to take gifts. We'll explain this here. Verse 7. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites and the people of the land. And he said to them, if you're willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat me for Ephron the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It's at the end of his field, for the full price given to me in your presence for the property of the burying place. Number one, Abraham could afford it. He was rich. He was richer than the Hittites. He wasn't going to take this gift when he could afford to pay for it. It shows part of this character. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with taking gifts, and you could offend somebody by offering to pay for a gift that they offer to you. But in his foreknowledge, Abraham understood, number one, if you remember when Abraham was coming back after the victory over those who captured Lot and Sodom, he says, I don't want people to think that I did it myself. He was trusting in God, and he wanted to know that God had provided for him. He didn't want to take this as a gift. The other reason, I believe, the main reason, is he wanted it to be in his family for generations. He didn't want all of a sudden when he dies and Isaac comes or somebody comes after Isaac for them to say, nope, sorry, you can't have it anymore. So he officially purchased the land. And I see the wisdom and character in this. Not that it's wrong to take a gift, but he could easily afford it. He looked down the road and saw the wise thing to do is to buy this land. By the way, you can go there today and see the place. You can't see the caves because they're actually underground, but you see a structure that was built by Herod the Great 2,000 years ago. One of the only standing buildings that are left really in the world that was built 2,000 years ago. This building that surrounds the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Jacob were buried. And he shows great character in this. And I was reminded of this, even for me. I've always liked the idea of getting gifts. I like to give gifts, but I remember sometimes it's easy to take advantage of other people who are willing to give. We see this sometimes in our guest house ministry. We have a ministry to pastors and their families and a guest house. And one of the things we ask pastors to do is clean up after themselves. Occasionally, only like not even once a year, we'll have a pastor who just completely disregards that and chooses not to. I actually hardly ever say anything, but I will actually send a letter of rebuke to them because I say, look, you're a spiritual leader. When you are asked to do something, you are given the gift, you need to follow through because that's a great example. That's a biblical example. And I know for me, there's sometimes I'm tempted. When we were over in Israel, the missionaries we stayed with, they offered us the use of a car, brand new car. I mentioned it before. And what they said is they said, look, just give in the offering plate what you want to for it. Well, in one sense of my mind says, look, you know what? Good, I get a great deal. It's a brand new car. I give a few shekels. They use shekels, threw shekels in the offering plate. But I'm like, no, I had set money aside for a car rental. I not only want to give what it would have cost me to rent the car, but I want to give over and above. Before we turned the car in, we made sure the car was washed. We had tolls that we experienced. I made sure we had left enough shekels. I wanted to go over and above to say, I thank you for this. And I see that example here in Abraham. He has this wisdom that says, I'm not going to take advantage. I can afford it. I have this money. The third thing I want to see here this morning is God will lead us when we look to him for direction. Abraham calls his servant Eliezer. And he says to Eliezer, look, I want you to go find a wife for my son. Now, could you imagine being tasked with that? Now, some of it wouldn't be bad. Maybe if you're a parent, if you could pick, in fact, we have one of our sons like, well, why don't you pick a wife for me type of idea. One of our sons, we have one son. Why don't you pick a wife for me? You know, we're not going to do that. But here in that culture, they would often arrange marriages. And so this servant, Eleazar, is entrusted by Abraham to pick a wife. By the way, that's actually somewhat still exists today. When we were over in Israel, I saw an article about in the the Jewish Orthodox community that they're having a shortage of what's called matchmakers. People get paid several $1,000s to make matches between different families to unite them together to keep basically everybody in this Orthodox community together. I don't think I'd really want that job either. They have a shortage of it because it's kind of a lot of responsibility. Eleazar is called to this responsibility, but the lessons I want to learn from this is letter A, we need to ask God for help. What does he do? Chapter 24, verse 10. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master, and went to Mesopotamia, where Abraham was from. And here's what he does, verse 12, he prays, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my father Abraham, my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young women to whom I say, please let down your jar that I may drink. And who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels also. Let her be the one you've appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to your master. Eleazar doesn't know how to pick the woman, but he turns to the right person. He turns to God. It's like, God, I want you to show favor on my master, and what I want you to do is I want you to show me the exact woman that you want for Isaac. Have her reach down and give me water, and then also offer to feed my camels as well, to go above and beyond. God, that's the direction. I'm reminded of what James chapter 1 verse 5 says. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. Ask God for wisdom. That's what Eleazar does. He asks God for this wisdom, and God gives it to him. Letter B, we can trust that God will answer our requests. Look at verse 15. Before he finished speaking. Sometimes we have to wait years. Abraham and Sarah waited years for God to answer the prayer about a child. But here, Eleazar, even before he was done praying, it says God answered the prayer, and Rebekah comes out. And we know the story. Most of you are familiar at least with the story that she offers not only water for him, but also water for all the camels. And he knows that this is the one. And by the way, God will also often give us above what we ask or think. Ephesians chapter 3 verse 20 says, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly all that we ask or think, according to the power that's within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. God can not only give us what we think, but many times he can do abundantly over and above what we ask. You notice this, what it says in verse 16. Not only does she come out, but she was very attractive. Rebekah was very attractive. She was a beautiful woman. He didn't ask for a beautiful woman. He just asked to show me the woman. And since I don't maybe care what she looks like, I'm sure it was a great relief. I mean, you're picking out a wife for your master's son. You don't want to bring back some girl that just isn't going to cut it. So God then takes and has this beautiful woman come out. He provides, and God answers this prayer. Not only answers it, but goes above and beyond. In conclusion, I want you to ask yourself these questions. First, are you learning from the tests in your life? Maybe some of you are flunking right now. Maybe you're getting the F because you're being tested by God and you walk around complaining griping, upset, because it's not working out the way you want it to work out. Do you think Abraham was happy with the idea, like, oh yes, I get to go sacrifice my very own son today? No. Tests and challenges are hard. And yet by trusting God through these things, our faith continues to increase and to grow, and we learn more and more about Him, as well as more about ourselves. I understand a little bit about this as a father. I want my children to be happy all the time. In fact, my wife and I have kind of different perspectives on this, because I a lot of times don't like it when they call from college, because then we a lot of times hear about all the problems that are going on. I'd rather almost them not call, and I can just picture in my mind that everything is going great and wonderful, and they're having an amazing time, and they have no problems, and they have hundreds of friends, and they have all these things. Instead, sometimes they call home and it's a little hard. My daughter this last week called from Thailand. She's serving at a mission in Thailand for the summer, and she called, and I want to picture that she's just having a great time all the time, but she called and she's sick, and she was tired and worn out and all these things. And in one sense, I don't want to hear it. I want to just picture that everything's going well all the time. But I know it's not good for them if everything goes well all the time, because they don't learn. If everything always goes well for us all the time, are we going to really learn to trust God? No. We're going to say, wow, this is great. And we often tend to become very selfish and self-centered, rather than learning through the tests and difficulties. So are you learning from what God brings into your life? Or do you find yourself complaining, arguing, getting the idea that, well, I'm a believer, and as a follower of God, everything should always go well for me, and like how I planned it? No. It's a chance to learn that we can trust God because He is the one faithful. He is the one providing for us. And He knows what we need far before we know what we need. And a lot of times what we think we need isn't exactly what is good for us. And going down to help my daughter with her house, I got to see my grandson a little bit. My wife's had the privilege of basically babysitting him the whole time so my daughter could help with the work we were doing. And, it's fun. He's a year and a half, but there's a lot of things that he thinks he wants that aren't really good for him. I mean, certain things, we're downstairs and he wants to walk around with bare feet on the floor that has, all types of scraps and trash, and he wants to be down there where we're using a nail gun and it's really loud and noisy, and he doesn't understand why he has to go upstairs when we're using a nail gun or we're using the 22 shells and pounding the nails into the cement floor. So often we're like that with God, as we want the things and we don't get what we want, we complain rather than understanding, look, I'm going to trust God through this. Secondly, do you display godly character to others? Do others around you see and know Christ? Do they want to be around you? I remember several years ago sitting down with a couple, and they were talking to us how, well, this person doesn't like us, and they don't want to be around us, and they don't want to be around us. And the whole time they're saying everybody else has a problem. Try to subtly say, well, have you ever thought that maybe you may be the problem? And a lot of times we create our own problems rather than choosing to let the fruit of the Spirit work through us. And what that does many times, I know I've seen it in my life. It's not that everybody loves me or wants to be around me, but I know when I first started subbing at the school, I was surprised how much the teachers liked me and the administration. They asked me to tutor, and I had all these opportunities I was given, not because of who I was. I was like, why is that? But as you follow God and the fruit of the Spirit just shines through you, it's amazing the power you have to influence others around you. And lastly, do you ask God for wisdom? Is your life full of asking God for wisdom? Or do you basically just choose to live on your own, to do things your way, to do things according to your desire? Or do you do them according to His? Maybe you're struggling. Maybe you're going through that trial. Maybe you're going through that difficulty. Ask God for wisdom, who gives abundantly and overflowing, and He will give it. Whatever, to bow your heads, close your eyes. Just take a moment this morning to let God's Word speak to your heart and mind here today.